Today we're going to be taking a look at two fans that I think kind of stink. The Eastern Straighten Out Blurry fan and the Lakewood Kool Operator Jr. These two fans are more or less the same thing. This one, I don't know if it's still manufactured to this day. This one was manufactured up until very recently. I believe this one was made in 2020. And this, I believe, is a product of the 90s or something in the early 2000s. This is model 007. So, as you can see, they are cosmetically very, very similar. Pretty much indistinguishable aside from the color of the plastic from the sides. Curiously, this one has the Lakewood pattern that they used in the 2000s. The only structural difference I can detect between the two is that the Lakewood one utilizes a C-frame shaded pole motor, and the West Bend utilizes a pretty generous PSC motor. Which I want to stop for a moment and underscore something I think is kind of funny about that. The Lakewood was sold to the general public as a consumer product, and the West Bend was built exclusively for government use. The West Bend was a prison fan, would be the slang term. It was intended to be sold in prisons as commissary to the inmates for use in cells. And so the government will be paying the light bill that the West Bend is connected to, and the consumers will be paying the light bill that the Lakewood is connected to. So isn't it interesting that the West Bend was fit with a high efficiency motor and the consumer grade one was fit with a very, very inefficient motor? Now, in theory, all the items sold in the commissary store, I forget what it's called, I think it has a certain name for it, were supposed to be clear such that inmates could not hide contraband items under them. But to me, this is not clear enough. Like if I take this is my contraband and I stick that under there, I mean, the fan totally blocks it. You can't see it through the fan at all. So I don't really quite understand how that works, but whatever. So the other difference between these two is the guard design. This is just basic lines, this is circular. Of these two, this was the first one I had, and I was extremely disappointed by it. It was very loud, and it really didn't move a lot of air. And I don't quite understand why, because the blade seems to be pretty good. It's got a good scoop to it, the pitch is decent. I guess it's got to be something to do with this shroud is not very aerodynamic. So I suspected that the Lakewood one has got to be better, if nothing else because of the circular guard pattern is much more aerodynamic and should allow a lot more air through with less noise, less restriction. Unfortunately, I was wrong, and they both stink. Both of these fans move very little air. They are extremely loud, and the Lakewood one is extremely inefficient. And I'm not talking about energy inefficient, because that's just like a stupid buzzword that gets thrown around, which is kind of useless information, because the way energy efficiency is presented is it just takes two products and says this one draws less power than this one, but it doesn't talk about the actual performance of those products and how much power those machines put out. I'm talking in terms of true efficiency in regards to power in versus work the machine completes. This one is extremely inefficient. This one doesn't do a lot of work either, but at least it doesn't draw a whole lot of power. So the Lakewood one is rated for 1.1 amps. And these are very small fans, right? They're 8-inch fans. 1.1 amps for an 8-inch fan. Meanwhile, this one is rated for 60 watts. And we would have to know the power factor to convert it to amps. Probably somewhere around 0.3, 0.4 amps. So it's fractional, it's less than half. It's like incandescent light bulb, LED light bulb. Or maybe fluorescent light bulb. What's amazing to me is that these C-frame shaded pole motors are still allowed to be sold today. They're still sold in basic fans like this, and we end up with fans, simple desktop fans that pull upwards of 0.7 amps and beyond, where we could have those units drawing 0.2 amps or below with a good quality capacitor motor. It doesn't make any sense because it's inconsistent, right? We have this efficiency craze, obsession, psychotic fascination with lighting, but then we go to fans which are used all over the place. I mean, tons of people use a fan every night while they're sleeping, and it's like, well, it can draw as much power as it wants, don't matter. Whatever. So let's turn these things on. We're going to start by running the western bend, west bend. I own 3 kilowatt meters, and abysmally I cannot find the other two. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write down the power information on a piece of paper as we go through this one, so that when I run the Lakewood I can read out the information and we have a good comparison. So we got 118.8 volts. We'll start with the amps and we'll begin on low. So this is already, to me this is already too loud to use in any reasonable environment. And in an office this would be unacceptable. In a kitchen you'd have to scream to the other person to be able to be heard. This is ridiculously loud. In terms of airflow, it's actually not as bad as I remembered it. I'm across the room, which is about 6 or 7 feet, and I can feel the air is still moving. But for the amount of noise it's making, it's just ridiculous. It sounds really restricted, and even up close to it, the air velocity is just abysmal. It's like whatever air is in there is fighting to get out as it is. Interestingly enough, the air does seem to travel a decent ways. That's 0.29 amps, 33 watts with a power factor of 0.95, and it's slightly out of balance, but not beyond what's reasonable. Medium. Quite a bit more noise, not much more performance. 0.32 amps, 37 watts, power factor 0.97. And because my brain just works so well, I already forgot to write down the power draw on low. So that was 0.29 amps, 33 watts, with a power factor of 94. Our medium we have 0.32. 37 watts, with a power factor of 0.96. And on high, we have 0.39 amps, 46 watts, with a power factor of 1. So it is abysmally loud on high, abysmal, and the airflow is just not there. Ten feet away, I can barely feel it. It's just not a good product. The aerodynamics design is just abysmal. You know, those old Lakewood Galaxy circulating fans, the 12-inch models, on full power, I think they're rated for 0.3 amps. Moves many times over more air with less noise. Now for the Lakewood. This is low. Now this is much more reasonable in terms of noise level. However, the power draw, we're already up to 0.32 amps as opposed to the Eastern straighten out, which was 0.29 amps. And in terms of airflow, this is hardly moving in the air. I can feel a slight draft about 6 feet away from it, but realistically you're not going to use this much more than 1 or 2 feet away from you. Watts is 24 as opposed to 33 on the other one, and the power factor is 0.67 as opposed to 0.94. Medium. There's the noise. So on medium, we are up to 0.57 amps as opposed to 0.32 of the Eastern straighten out. So that's almost twice as much power. 41 watts versus 37 at a power factor of 0.6. Airflow wise, it just really disappoints. I can feel more air across the room now, but it's not much. For the amount of noise, it's really just not much. Alright, get your earring protection out. So on high, we are at 0.87 amps as opposed to 0.39. 60 watts as opposed to 46. And 0.58 as opposed to 1. So the power draw is twice as much as the other one. It's abysmally loud. But now it's actually moving some air. It's still not an impressive amount, but it is moving some now. Across the room, I can feel a draft, but it's not much. Alright, so now let's turn them on together and let's run them side by side, and we'll make some commentary about how the air is moving out of it, because they do move air completely differently. Alright, so I'll put the camera in the center here so that you get a kind of a stereoscopic effect of the two different sounds. So on low, the Eastern straighten out is much faster, runs much faster, consequently it moves more air. Now, what's interesting about these two, and this does speak volumes about the difference in the guard patterns, this one is pretty strong right at the front of the fan. It's almost about the same, but this one diminishes really, really quick. Like back to where the camera is, it's almost nothing. But this one, the airflow remains. There's our camera tripod kick for the video. Back at where the camera is, as opposed to right up in front of the fan, is almost the same, which is very interesting. And just another thing I thought of, it might be interesting someday to swap the guards on these two, and the motors and the blades, and just to see what happens. Probably the guard would be the most interesting thing. I think the blades are pretty much the same. On medium, the Eastern straighten out is still much louder. Now this one's moving a ton more air right up close to it, but again, it diminishes substantially. I can still feel it where I'm at back behind the camera, but I can feel a lot more from the Eastern straighten out. Much, much more. Because again, the air, it travels. It's a lot weaker right up front than the Lakewood, but the air stream pushes further. Now we'll go to the high, which you may not be able to hear the commentary. So on high, can't hear anything. This is actually pretty strong right up against the fan, and this is not. But we have the same problem. The airstream from the Lakewood diminishes so quickly that back behind the camera, they're about the same. If not the Eastern straighten out to be slightly more powerful. I'd say they're about the same. It's kind of hard to tell. I'm going to go with they're approximately the same. Even though this moves way less air right in front of the fan, this one, for whatever reason, the airflow travels. So it's not really what I was expecting. I really thought that the Lakewood one would work much better, but it just doesn't. It's quieter, which is nice, makes it usable in some applications, and the aerodynamics seem like they would be much better, but in terms of performance, the Eastern straighten out actually works better, noise aside. The airflow is much more useful. It travels much further away from the fan, which is just odd because the guard on the Lakewood is so much better. So that was an interesting comparison. It did not really yield exactly what I was expecting, which just adds some kind of interest, you know, to check something and expect one thing and get something else. I always was a big fan of the Lakewood brand. I remember seeing the box fans all over the place when I was younger. One of the first fans I had was the Lakewood HV4, the Lakewood HV9, and so I'm very much a big fan of the Lakewood brand. And a lot of times I say pretty much anything by Lakewood I like. But as I've started to explore more of their products, I think that they made some junk. I think the oscillating fans they made were awful. I think the A series was just abysmal. Again, extremely loud, extremely inefficient, not durable in the slightest. The DX series was miserable, not powerful. Actually, I would take the DX series over the A, but you know, the motors were hard to service. They used those stupid, junky little orange capacitors that always failed. It's just awful. Not very good equipment. And although I like this particular one, this is important to me. This is given to me by a friend, and I'd like to find a bigger one that goes with it. I think these were not very good either. I don't think this is a very good fan. It's extremely loud, it's extremely inefficient, and it doesn't move much air. And very, very much to my surprise, the larger, I don't know, it was 18 or 20 inch, whatever it is, counterpart, I'm pretty much equally as disappointed with. I have one of the later Kool Operators with the 5 cheap brace blade, I think it is. And I had the opportunity to compare that unit to the older one that had the 7-wing blade with the big motor, and there was not a big difference. So the aerodynamics or something about these fans, these Lakewood fans, was just not very good. It's too bad because it's a cool looking product, but it just doesn't work that good.